probably one of the most requested ever interviews for Real Vision, Russell Clark from Horseman. Now, Russell is famous as not only a short seller who managed to be short in rising markets and not lose money for extended periods of time, but he's also famous for his macro thinking. It's very rare for Russell to appear on television or do any interviews at all, so it's a real coup for us to get Russell on. I want to talk about how he constructs his portfolios, how he thinks about the world, and some of his secrets. Hopefully we'll find it super interesting.
And this is where part of my thinking about fund management came, is that funds go up and down, but there are sometimes you have moves in funds that are out of character with what the investment manager said they're going to do. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What I would call sort of a career-ending move, which happens.
Yeah.
And so what I would then do is go and look at why that happened. I'd say more than 50%, maybe 70, 80% of the times when that happened, it was because they had a currency move that they didn't expect. And that might sound strange, but if you look at the various different fund strategies you've got out there and talk to the managers, what you find with, for example, Japan managers is they never expect the yen to appreciate. I've never met any Japanese fund manager who goes, yen's going to 80, so I'm going to short Japan. It's never happened. Likewise with EM managers, you never meet especially maybe these days, but a few years ago, you'd never meet an EM manager going, yeah, Indian rupee is going to halve, ruble is going to fall 60%, short everything. They never say that. And yet, if you focus on the currencies and you look at the history of the currencies, and currencies tend to have a mean reverting type of feature, you find these types of moves happen all the time. And so through that sort of my background of being in Hong Kong in '98 and then being at GAM for a few years and looking at how funds worked, what we try and do is invert the process. So we put currencies at the beginning of the investment process rather than at the end, or assume that some steady state is going to continue with no change. And that's really been the heart of how I look at things.
Hugh Hendry is one of my most favourite people in the world. Always love every time I get a chance to get together with him. I love the way he thinks. He's incredibly intelligent. He also looks at the world in a different way to everybody else. And he also constructs portfolios brilliantly. He's a king of kind of portfolio construction. And I think we've always got something to learn from Hugh. He's always going to be engaging and funny as well, so I'm sure we'll have a good chat. We'll ramble off path as ever with Hugh, explore different areas of the world, because Hugh's got this great brain and a great way of thinking that I always love to sit down and kind of pick his brain and how he thinks about things. I'm sure it's going to be incredibly instructive and really useful for all of us.
My portfolio today is clean, simple, and kind of punchy. I have essentially 4 positions. I have a big position where I'm long dollar yen, long dollar, short yen, which really takes me into that world of talking about 10-year treasuries, talking about yield curves, because they've all come together, and with Japan pursuing its policy of targeting 0 10-year yields, the yen's really become a very leveraged play on global sovereign yield curves, or what 10-year treasuries are doing. If I generalize, I'd say my book is a reflation book. And therefore, somewhat, I think you can challenge me and we can push back. So I have that position. When you do these interviews, you interview younger people than me. Everyone's younger than me these days, and they're all still reading the great books, on the art of investing. And when you start carrying FX positions, big ones, one of my favorite. Not my favorite books, but certainly favorite introductions to a book is the Victor Niederhoff, is it The Art of a Speculator, of that nature, and where he is running a dollar yen position, which is 10 times his net worth. I mean, there is a reason why he doesn't really manage a hedge fund today. But just the anxiety and the way you create this inanimate object and you make it and you start talking to it. There's a Tim Robbins book, one of my all-time favorite books, where the 3 characters are a sock, a tin of baked beans and a spoon, and it's a road trip. It's their journey across America. you know, and when you have these positions, you know, I get that talking to inanimate objects. Anyway, I diverse it, which is unhelpful. So reflationary trade, we have dollar yen, which, as I say, really a proxy for, I guess, wanting to pay global rates. We have probably our biggest risk position is in Europe. We think the one real global outlier in terms of mispriced security is the 2-year Schatz, the 2-year German government bond yield.
Hugely negative.
Hugely negative. We entered that after the French elections.
Yeah.
Perhaps we'll discuss what we were doing before and after. We had, we had a very elegant trade going into, it was a remarkably low probability that Le Pen would win. Remarkably low, and yet she did seize, what, 35% of the popular. But the consequences if she had won would have been off the charts. And we had a trade which completely took that risk out of a client portfolio, completely. And you could have had immense asymmetry to the upside.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that the public markets would sell you that ahead of the event for free. And so here we are now, and of course we know that Macron won, and I was able to unwind that position, and we've got a positive profit on the year despite being wrong. And I always keep coming back to
that's good trade construction.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. This is the 15th year of what now is a very modest hedge fund, micro hedge fund, and you get tenure as a manager via what happens when you're wrong. So there's one where it's a low probability event, but the event didn't happen. If it happened, it would have unlocked like a 40% return on NAV, and it didn't happen, and yet we still walked away with 40 basis points.
Which is great.
I'll take that. Give me that every time.
Yeah.
Before we even launched Real Vision, I contacted Anne Stevenson-Yang to try and sit down and talk to her about China. And I'm going to remind her of this on camera. She may not remember that I sent her that email back in the summer of 2014. She's someone that spent so much time in China, has such an interesting perspective on it, and I can't wait to sit down and get her take on what's happening on the ground and what it really means, because so many people have an opinion on China. Anne's one of those people that's actually lived there for 25 years and she makes no secret of it. She's pretty outspoken about her views. So we'll sit down, we'll talk about Chinese credit markets, we'll talk about the politics, we'll talk about Xi Jinping's status as leader, and we'll hopefully get a sense of what's really going on the ground in China.
It's just really hard when you've lost money for a number of years betting on the Chinese catastrophe and being wrong to continue betting on that. It's been safer to just bet on, throw in your bet with the central bank, more or less. But the thing that really has surprised me this year is how in 2015 in the summer, first you had the crash of the Shanghai market, and then you had the devaluation of 3% in August, and those two events really, really undermined international confidence in the Chinese government. I'm surprised that confidence, I'm not sure about confidence, but belief has returned. So the international investment world has come back to the point of view like, well, they're in control of everything. It's a closed economy. They can just keep putting in money, that, which is kind of a startling recovery, really.
Well, what do you think drives that? Is it just the fact that, well, it hasn't fallen over yet, so until it does, why even worry about it?
No, it's because I think the fundamental reason is because we look at data. And we fail to, although we understand that data points in China are targets rather than calculated results of information. And we know that, but they're all we have. And China does generate a huge amount of data, so we've got to use the data. So investors will fix on a couple of data points. And then as soon as they do, they stop being relevant.
Right.
But investors don't know that, or they don't know it as quickly as the data points stop being relevant. So one example is the interbank interest rates, interbank loan rates. As I said, in 2013, in June, interbank rates spiked to 12, 13, 14% overnight, and the central bank freaked out. So now what you see, because bankers do still need to borrow money and they do still want to lend money, And sometimes the rates are higher than the central bank has told them are permissible rates. So the whole market has gone offline. So when you meet an interbank banker in China, on his phone he'll have 3,000 contacts in WeChat and another, couple thousand in QQ tool, and they'll be organized by bank and by region and by size and type of bank, and they just text each other looking for loans. And those loans, they're interbank deposits, and those deposits come at much higher rates than would be permissible on the interbank market. So as they say in Chinese, there's a policy and then there's a response. So there's always the policies are very often managed for optical reasons. And so the optics change, and we do tend to swallow that and to believe that, but the reality underneath does not change. So another example is the reserves. So the foreign reserves, the bleeding from the foreign reserves that we saw in 2015 and 2016 has stopped, and China has been reporting increases in foreign reserves. Now, capital flight, I think, is not as bad as it was then, by any means. That's very much due to the weak dollar. But if you look at all the accounts, China has not had a net inflow for a couple of years now. Yeah. All of the gains in the reserves are valuation gains. And since we really don't know what's in those reserves, how they count their loans, how they count their equities, how they count their private investments, God knows how they could be marking up that stuff. The currency mix doesn't make a lot of sense for the markup. So internationally we think, well, they've really controlled capital flight and they have this wall of currency and the interbank market is controlled and they're deleveraging. None of those things are really true, but they're the metrics we have.